I was 68 years old the first time another man's hands rested on my bare skin after my husband passed away. I want to thank you for being here, for taking the time to listen to something deeply personal. Before I continue, I need to ask for your support. Please subscribe to our channel if you find yourself drawn to stories like this one. Leave a like on this video because it genuinely helps us reach more people who need to hear these kinds of truths. And I'm asking you something more personal than that. In the comments below, tell me where you are right now. Are you in a small town where the evenings fall slow and gentle, where nothing much seems to change? Or are you in a city where the lights never really go dark, where everything moves faster than you'd like? I can tell you exactly what that moment felt like, how the light fell through the window, what song was playing so softly in the background that I almost didn't register it. But before I get there, you need to understand what came before. You need to understand what 5 years of silence had done to me. My name is Margaret, though some people still call me Maggie, the name my husband liked best. We lived our entire married life in a small town in Nebraska, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where change arrives slowly and is always treated with some suspicion. Population 2,342, though nobody's updated that sign in probably 15 years. The kind of town where you grow old, go to church on Sundays whether you believe or not, bury the people you love, talk about the weather and the price of things, and then wait for your own turn to be put in the ground. That was the life I thought I had. That was the life I thought would be enough. Then Thomas died in a grocery store parking lot on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, and everything I thought I knew about enough was revealed to be a lie. His heart simply stopped. One moment he was coming back from getting milk, the next moment he was gone. Red ambulance lights painting the small town in worry and confusion, the kind of worry that small towns get when something breaks the pattern. I remember standing in the parking lot, watching those lights blink against the darkening sky, thinking that this couldn't possibly be the ending. Not here, not like this, not without warning. But it was. The funeral was well attended, as these things always are in small towns. People brought casseroles, they said the right words. They held my hand and looked at me with the kind of pity that makes you want to disappear. Within a week, everyone had moved on. Their lives had simply continued. But mine had stopped, had curled up into itself, had become a thing of routine and numbness and the careful avoidance of feeling anything at all. 5 years passed. I became the widow everyone talked about in that pitying way. I became a woman who had finished her part in life's drama and was now just sitting in the wings, waiting for the curtain to fall. I moved through my days with mechanical precision. I watered plants that I didn't particularly care about. I cooked meals for one and ate them while watching television programs I didn't really watch. I existed, but I was not living. Then one morning, I woke up with a pain in my shoulder that wouldn't go away. It started as something small, just a nagging ache that came and went. But over the course of weeks, it became something more persistent, something that settled into my body like an unwelcome house guest who decided to stay. I couldn't reach for the top shelf anymore. Lifting anything heavier than a coffee mug made me wince. Even the simple act of lying down became complicated, something to be planned and executed carefully to avoid the sharp reminder that my body was aging, was breaking down, was following the same path. Everything else followed toward deterioration. I finally went to see the doctor at the clinic on Main Street, Dr. Patterson, who'd been practicing medicine in our little town for as long as I could remember. He poked and prodded my shoulder with the kind of detached efficiency that doctors develop after decades of similar examinations. He sent me for an X-ray, which was really just an excuse to confirm what we both already knew. Then he gave me that half smile that doctors give older women, the one that suggests pity mixed with professional sympathy. Some arthritis, he said, sliding a pamphlet across his desk. Some tendinitis. Nothing serious for someone your age, Margaret. You'll manage. As if managing pain was the same as healing from it. As if reaching a certain age meant you should simply accept the gradual breakdown of your own body without protest. The pamphlet had a picture on the front. A young man with kind eyes and steady hands, smiling at someone just out of frame. His name was printed below in crisp letters. Michael Hayes, licensed physical therapist. I remember thinking he looked too young to understand the kind of pain that doesn't show up on an X-ray. The kind of pain that comes from sleeping alone for 5 years. The kind of pain that comes from empty chairs at the dinner table. From a half-empty closet. from reaching for a hand that isn't there anymore. But the nights were getting longer, and I was tired of waking up with my arms stiff and useless. Tired of the small limitations that kept creeping into my life, stealing away the simple things I used to take for granted. The brochure mentioned home visits, and that decided it for me. I don't like driving at night anymore, not since Thomas died in that parking lot. Even in daylight, I feel anxious behind the wheel, like something terrible is waiting around every corner, ready to snatch away whatever I have left. So I called the clinic and made an appointment, the day he was supposed to arrive. I found myself doing ridiculous things. I straightened the sofa cushions for the third time, even though they didn't need straightening. I wiped down the kitchen countertop until it gleamed, even though it was already clean. I caught myself in front of the mirror, checking my hair, fixing things that didn't need fixing. Then I stopped myself and went to look at the wedding photograph above the television. Thomas in his dark suit, me in the white dress I'd sewn myself. Both of us grinning like we believed love could outrun anything. Like we thought we'd have forever. "I'm not replacing you," I whispered to the picture, which was ridiculous and somehow necessary all at once. "It's just physical therapy. It's just someone helping me with my shoulder." But my heart was racing in a way that suggested I was lying to both of us. When the doorbell rang, my stomach fluttered in a way I hadn't felt in decades. I opened the door slowly, suddenly very aware of my old sweatpants and the loose t-shirt I was wearing, suddenly very conscious of how I looked to someone from the outside world. He was taller than in the brochure. Darker hair, eyes the color of strong coffee, a kind of gentle presence that seemed to take up more space than his physical body. For just a moment, I saw surprise flash across his face, as if he'd expected someone frailer, more obviously broken. Then that professional smile settled into place, warm and reassuring without being overly familiar. "Mrs. Carter," he said, and his voice was warm, Midwestern, steady, the kind of voice that comes from someone who knows how to make people feel safe. "I'm Michael. Thank you so much for having me." I stepped aside, suddenly hyper-aware of the faint lavender cleaner smell in the air, the ticking of the hallway clock, the way my breathing had changed. As he set up his massage table in the middle of my living room, he asked questions about my pain. How long I'd had it, what made it worse, what made it better. I found myself talking about lifting heavy casserole dishes, about reaching for the good china on the top shelf that I never used anymore, because there was no occasion that required it. I didn't mention the nights I lay on my left side, because rolling onto my right shoulder hurt just enough to remind me of all the other aches I couldn't point to on a chart, couldn't explain to a doctor, couldn't fix with medication. He took notes on a small tablet, nodding every so often, and I was struck by the fact that he was actually listening, not just waiting for me to finish talking so he could move on to the next thing. He kept looking up to meet my eyes, kept showing me that he was present in this moment, that I wasn't a burden on his schedule. "Okay, Margaret," he said finally, using my first name so naturally that it didn't feel rude at all. "If you're comfortable, I'd like to start with some gentle mobilization and soft tissue work. I'll be focusing on your shoulder and neck area. I'm going to explain everything as we go, and if anything hurts or doesn't feel right, you tell me and we stop immediately. You're completely in charge here. Does that work for you?" No one had said those words to me in a very long time. After Thomas died, it felt like life snatched the steering wheel right out of my hands and never gave it back. Every decision was made for me or by me out of necessity rather than choice. Every moment felt like something I was enduring rather than something I was choosing. "Yes," I said, "that works for me." I lay down on the massage table, staring up at the ceiling fan that my mother had bought 50 years ago and that Thomas and I had never bothered to replace. It had a gentle wobble to it that had become almost comforting over the years, a kind of rhythm I'd learned to live with. The faint, clean smell of eucalyptus cream began to fill the air. Outside, a dog barked once and then went quiet. The world continued on in its ordinary way, indifferent to what was happening inside my living room. He draped a towel across my chest, uncovering only my right shoulder and upper arm. His movements were efficient, not clumsy, not lingering, just professional and careful. Then one of his hands slid under my elbow. The other landed just below my collarbone. "I'm going to lift your arm a bit," he said. "Just want to see how the joint moves. You tell me what you notice, okay?" His touch was warm, not in a romantic way, just alive, just present. It startled me more than the motion itself did. No one had touched me with purpose in years. Not to comfort, not to care, not to check in on whether something hurt. As he guided my arm through a small arc, my shoulder complained in a dull, familiar ache. But something else happened too. Something I wasn't prepared for. My chest tightened, not from physical pain, but from an odd, sudden mix of relief and grief so intense that it took my breath away. There was a lump in my throat that I hadn't invited, hadn't wanted. Couldn't seem to swallow down. I blinked hard, angry at my own eyes, angry at my own body for betraying me like this. "That's all right if it's a little uncomfortable," Michael said, mistaking the gloss in my eyes for pain. "We're just waking things up. That joint's been guarding, trying to protect you from further injury." Guarding. The word echoed in a space that had nothing to do with bone and tendon. How much of me had been guarding, I wondered. How much of my heart had gone to sleep when they wheeled Thomas's body away? How many parts of myself had I locked down, shut off, protected so carefully that they'd simply stopped functioning? When his thumb found a tight knot of muscle just below the base of my neck, my reaction stunned me completely. A shiver ran down my spine. My breath caught in a way that had nothing to do with pain. It felt like he'd found some hidden switch I hadn't known was there, some part of me that had been waiting all this time for someone to flip it. Heat rushed into my face. I stared hard at the family photos across the room. Me and Thomas at a picnic 20 years ago, both of us laughing like fools, like we believed we had all the time in the world. For a moment, every instinct screamed at me to push his hand away, to sit up, to tell him to leave, to lock myself back inside the safe, numb little cage I'd built so carefully over the last 5 years. But another, quieter part of me said something different. It said to stay, to feel this, just this once. It said that 5 years was long enough to be dead while still breathing. "Too much?" he asked softly, easing up, and his voice had to push through the rush in my ears to reach me. "No," I managed. I barely recognized my own voice. "I just haven't felt that in a long time." I prayed he would hear it as a comment on my stiff muscles, nothing more, nothing that would make this complicated or inappropriate. He gave a small, respectful nod, his eyes kind, not prying, not asking for more than I was ready to give. "We'll go slow," he said. "No need to force anything." He told me about his mother in Topeka, and the long Sunday drives he made to have dinner with her. He mentioned her pot roast, the bad highway construction, the old neighbor's dog that still barked at him like he was 12 years old and had stolen something from her yard. His voice softened the hard corners of the house. It had been so long since someone else's stories had filled my kitchen, had made it feel like a place where life was still happening. We worked through the exercises again, the same gentle arcs, the same careful pressure. I was more aware this time of everything, the creak of the table, the pattern of his breathing, the exact warmth where his fingers wrapped around my arm. The way time seemed to move differently when he was touching me, like seconds stretched into moments stretched into something larger. "Breathe through it," he said quietly as he stretched my arm overhead. And I did, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like I was breathing life into more than just stiff muscles. Halfway through, he paused. "Can I show you something?" he asked. "A movement you can do on your own without pain?" I nodded, and he stepped behind me as I sat on the edge of the table. His hands settled lightly on my shoulders, and he guided me through a slow rotation, the kind that looks like nothing until you feel where the pain hides, where the tension lives. "Good," he murmured, his voice near my ear. "You're doing great." That simple sentence hit harder than it should have. No one had told me I was doing great at anything in a very long time. No one had told me I was doing anything at all except existing, except surviving, except waiting. "I'm trying," I whispered. "I know," he said. And I had the sense that he wasn't just talking about the exercise. By the time he left that day, a small fern sat on my windowsill. "For your kitchen," he'd said, holding out the small pot with obvious care. "Plants heal too." "You're spoiling me," I'd laughed, flustered by the gesture. "Only the kind ones," he answered simply, without teasing, without the kind of flirtation that would have made this complicated. Just stated as fact, as if kindness deserved kindness in return. That night the wind rattled the old windows, and every creak and groan sounded like the echo of his voice. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling ridiculous and alive all at once. I thought about Thomas, about the way he touched me when we were newly married, before illness and time created distance between us, about how in the last year of his life, my hands were all about care, about lifting and cleaning and helping, not about closeness, not about the kind of touch that says I see you, I want you, I'm here with you. Grief, I realized, doesn't vanish. It shifts into routine, into numbness, into longing you don't feel safe admitting even to yourself. 2 weeks passed. Michael came twice a week for therapy, shoulder first, then sometimes he'd check my neck, my back, showing me small ways to hold myself that didn't hurt as much. We talked while he worked, about his father, gone 10 years, about my Thomas, gone 5, about the strange way you can miss people in grocery store aisles or at red lights, about how sometimes you still reach for the phone to call them before remembering they're not there anymore. Sometimes I still set the table for 2 without thinking, I admitted once. Sometimes my mom's favorite song comes on the radio and I have to pull over, he said. We smiled at each other, sad knowing smiles you only share with someone else who's had the rug pulled out from under them. Every now and then his hand would brush, somewhere that wasn't strictly clinical. The side of my hand as he adjusted my wrist. The ridge of my jaw as he shifted my head for a stretch. Each tiny contact sparked through me like I'd been plugged back into something I'd forgotten about, something I thought was lost forever. I hated how much I craved it. I loved how much I craved it. Both could be true. One afternoon after 4 sessions, I caught myself humming while doing the dishes. Humming. The sound startled me so completely that I stopped mid-scrub, standing there with my hands in soapy water, staring out the kitchen window. The maple tree outside shone bright with fall leaves, sunlight glittering like coins between the branches. It had been there every fall. I just hadn't looked at it, hadn't really seen it, in years. Michael was due at 3 o'clock. I told myself my heart beating faster around noon was just because I didn't want the stretches to hurt, just nervous about pain. Nothing more. He showed up on time but more subdued than usual. There were faint shadows under his eyes, a weariness that pulled at his shoulders. You okay? I asked. Rough week, he said. My mom's health is up and down, a lot of driving, a lot of worry. Without thinking about it, I made tea. This time when I offered him a cup, he said yes instead of politely declining. We sat at my kitchen table with 2 mismatched mugs between us, and he told me about waiting rooms and doctors who speak in percentages. About watching his mother, the woman who used to chase him with a dish towel, move slowly with a cane. When he reached for the tea, his fingers brushed mine. Neither of us moved away right away. Then he said something that lodged in my ribs like a splinter I couldn't quite remove. Grief doesn't disappear, Margaret. It just changes what kind of person you are. And sometimes, he added, his eyes meeting mine, you meet someone who understands it so well that it doesn't feel as heavy when you stand next to them. Suddenly, I was hyper-aware of the space between us, of my own mouth, of every wrinkle in my shirt, every age spot on my hands. I stood too fast, pretending to refill my tea, my back to him. You should rest, I said, my voice shaking slightly. All that driving must be exhausting. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable, he said quietly. You didn't, I whispered. That's the problem. The part of me that was afraid wished he had made me uncomfortable, wished he had said something inappropriate, so I'd have an excuse to pull away. But he hadn't. He'd been gentle and kind and honest, and all 3 of those things terrified me. It's easier to pull away from something confusing than from something gentle, he said, understanding without me having to explain it. At our next appointment, things were different. He unfolded the table but moved slower. His instructions were precise. His hands, when they found my shoulder blade or guided my arm, were careful with a new kind of distance. He was trying to build a wall neither of us could fully see, but both of us could feel standing between us, brick by brick. I wanted to thank him for respecting my fear, and I wanted to argue with him at the same time, to tell him that I was tired of being careful, tired of protecting myself, tired of pretending that I didn't feel what was so obviously there. When he finished the session, I stayed lying there, eyes closed. He didn't immediately move to pack up. The silence grew thick and heavy, but not harsh, not angry, just full of things we weren't saying. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me. You're improving, he said carefully. Soon you won't need me anymore. I didn't like how that sounded, the thought of him stopping, coming, of this ending, of going back to my silent house and my quiet life made something twist under my ribs. "How are your boundaries?" I asked suddenly, surprising myself with the boldness of it. He blinked. He set his notes down. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe we should take a break. You've made good progress, and I don't want to blur lines we can't unblur." Something twisted in my chest. "Is this about me?" I asked. "Or your mother, or both?" "It's about being honest," he said, looking down at his hands. "With myself, with you. There are feelings here, and that's risky, that's complicated." I exhaled. "I feel them too," I said quietly. "I haven't felt anything in a long time, and now I don't know what to do with it." We looked at each other, and there was that click again, that complicated feeling of being completely seen by another person, of being known in a way that couldn't be undone. "Maybe that's exactly why we have to be careful," he murmured. "Maybe," I agreed, "but it doesn't make them less real." He turned away, packed up the table with movements controlled as if precision could fix everything. At the door, he paused. "Take care of yourself, Margaret," he said. "And you," I answered. "Take care of your heart." The door closed. The house felt bigger and emptier both at once. 2 days crept by. I cooked meals I barely tasted, watered plants that didn't need it, stared at the road through my front window, knowing exactly which car I was hoping to see and scolding myself for it. I was 70 years old. I shouldn't be this desperate for someone. I shouldn't be this afraid of being alone again. On the 5th morning, I dialed his number. When he answered, his voice was steady but quieter. "Margaret," he said like it was both a greeting and a caution, "I probably shouldn't be talking to you." "I know," I said. "I just needed to say thank you for helping me feel human again." I hesitated, then added, "For reminding me that I'm still alive." Silence, then a sigh that sounded like it came from somewhere deep. "You were always human," he said. "You just forgot your own pulse." I smiled even as my eyes stung with tears. I wanted to say more, wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that I hadn't just forgotten my pulse. I'd buried it deliberately, wrapped it in layers of grief and fear, and the comfortable numbness of a life that didn't require me to feel anything at all. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said thank you. "I'll be in town tomorrow," he said finally. "If you'd like to finish your therapy plan, I can stop by. Strictly professional." "Yes," I said too quickly. "Please." The next day came wrapped in late fall light, everything outside looking like it had been painted in gold and tiredness. This time he came without the table. Just his bag and an unsure expression that made him look younger, more vulnerable than he had in any of our previous meetings. "No equipment today?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just checking in," he replied. "Seeing how you're doing, really." We sat at the kitchen table again. 2 mugs, 1 rhythm of breathing that gradually synchronized until I realized I was matching my breaths to his. "You look tired," I said. "You look lonely," he said back. The honesty of it broke something in me. I felt tears slide down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. "I don't know who I am anymore," I whispered. "After Thomas died, I thought I became less, became half a person. Now I'm scared. I'm scared that feeling things again might make me too much." "Feeling anything after loss doesn't make you too much," he said. "It just makes you alive." His hand slid across the table, stopped, hovered, then finally rested over mine. It wasn't a romantic grab or a dramatic gesture. It was a warm, steady touch that said, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. And you're not alone." My fingers curled around his before I thought it through. My heart pounded like I'd run uphill. Then I pulled my hand back, pressing it to my chest, suddenly aware of how much it hurt to want something, how much it costs to let yourself feel again. "I can't," I said. "I don't know if I can do this." "I know," he answered. "I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for." We stayed like that for a long moment, hands apart, truths hanging in the air between us like something alive and breathing. When he left, there was no dramatic scene. Just another ordinary door closing on an ordinary afternoon filled with very unordinary feelings. 2 weeks passed. Michael didn't come in person, but every so often he texted, "How's the shoulder? Don't forget to stretch." "The maple outside your window looks beautiful today." Little things enough to remind me that somewhere someone still saw me, not as a patient, not as the widow with arthritis, but as a person, as someone worth thinking about. I went back to church one Sunday for the first time in months. The pastor spoke about forgiveness. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving ourselves for the thoughts we had, the feelings we carried, the ways we tried to stay alive during impossible seasons. His words slipped into the cracks Michael's work had opened, and I felt something begin to heal in places I hadn't known were broken. I walked home under a bright sky, every leaf too vivid, every laugh of passing children too sharp against the quiet inside me. At my front steps, I noticed a folded note tucked under the doormat. "Stopped by to check the boiler. Didn't want to bother you." I haven't thought about much of anything, I admitted. It's been hard to think beyond the day in front of me. "You're thinking now," he said. "Because you're here," I said, and immediately wished I could take it back. But he didn't look away. "If you came here out of pity," I started to say. "I didn't," he cut in. "I came because I couldn't stop thinking about you. I came because it's raining and I suddenly remembered the sound of your voice on the phone, and I couldn't not come." We stood in the living room with the rain tapping a soft pattern against the windows, and I felt something shift inside me, some part of me that had been frozen, finally beginning to thaw. When his hand lifted to my face, it was the slowest motion I'd ever seen. A pause, a question. His fingertips touched my cheek like he expected me to flinch, like he was prepared for me to pull away and tell him this was wrong, that we couldn't do this. I didn't. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I let myself lean toward someone, let myself accept that touch. For the first time in years, I murmured, "I don't feel like I'm betraying him." "You're not," Michael said. "You're just remembering you exist." That sentence cracked something open inside me and held it there gently, like you'd hold a bird with a healing wing, something fragile and precious and alive. I kissed him first, soft, hesitant, tasting rain and grief and a little bit like forgiveness. We didn't fall into anything more. We didn't remake our lives in a moment. We pulled apart. We breathed. For a long moment, we just stood there, foreheads almost touching, acknowledging what had passed between us. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For not stopping sooner, for letting this happen." "Don't be," I said quietly. "I've spent a lifetime stopping myself. Just this once. I needed to know what it felt like not to." Life didn't explode afterward. There were no scandals, no whispers from neighbors, no sermons that felt pointed at me specifically. In a town of 2,000 people, you'd think word would get out, but either people were kinder than I expected, or they simply understood that sometimes grief needs a gentle hand to find its way back to life. What we had was smaller than a grand romance, gentler than a scandal. He came by sometimes to check the garden, to fix the latch on the back gate, to sit on my porch steps while I poured lemonade into mismatched glasses. He still texted about stretches and ointments, about his mom's condition, about the maple leaves outside my window turning every shade of gold. We didn't cross that line again, not in any dramatic way, but we both knew we'd walked right up to it. And for one quiet moment on a rainy afternoon, leaned across. What changed most wasn't us. It was me. I went to visit Thomas's grave for the first time in nearly a year. The grass had grown long. I brushed leaves off his headstone and knelt down in the dirt, not caring about my knees. "I met someone," I said to the stone, to the man I couldn't see but still wanted to hear me. "He hasn't taken your place. No one ever will. But he reminded me that I'm still here, that I'm still alive, and I think you'd want that for me. I think you'd want me to know that loving someone new doesn't mean I loved you any less." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the smell of damp earth and something clean. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing between past and present as two separate things. I felt like both men, one gone and one living, had given me something, and I was finally ready to accept it. Permission not to forget, but to continue. Permission to be alive, fully and completely, even though he wasn't here to see it. Now, months later, the house is still the same on paper. Same furniture, same old fan with its gentle wobble, same creaky step that groans whenever the weather changes. But I've changed how I live inside it. I let music play louder sometimes. I talk back to the television. I wear the nice cardigan to the grocery store instead of saving it for some occasion that never comes. I water the fern Michael brought more carefully than my other plants, like it's something precious. I look at my reflection without wincing every time. I've started wearing lipstick again, just the pale pink kind, nothing dramatic, but enough to remind myself that I'm still a woman, not just a widow. Michael still comes by once in a while. Sometimes it's just to drop off fresh herbs from his mother's garden. Sometimes it's to sit in silence on my porch and let the air between us say what we're both too respectful to push further. We are not a grand romance. We are not a scandal that will be whispered about in the diner and at church. We are two people whose paths crossed at a moment when both of us were fragile, and something gentle stepped in, something that didn't demand or push, but simply offered presence and kindness, and the reminder that life goes on, that hearts can heal, that it's never too late to feel alive again. What we shared wasn't perfect, but it wasn't shameful either. It was human, complicated, and meaningful in a way that doesn't fit neatly into anyone else's opinions or judgments. If you've listened this far and felt something move in you, a flicker, a protest, a quiet recognition, know this. You're not wrong for wanting to feel alive again. You're not beyond love because your heart got confused in your grief. You're not too old, too broken, too marked by loss to deserve another chance at happiness. You are allowed to be complicated. You are allowed to be imperfect. You are allowed to be a story that doesn't fit in tidy lines, that challenges what people think healing should look like, that insists on living even when you thought you were done. Healing isn't going backward to who you were before the loss. It's learning how to live as the person you've become because of it. It's understanding that you can honor what was while still reaching for what could be. Margaret isn't the name of a saint. It's my name. A woman who loved one man for 40 years, lost him, and then one rainy afternoon let another person's kindness wake up a part of her she thought was gone forever. If any part of that sounds like you, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Tell me about the moment your heart woke up again, even if it made no sense on paper. Tell me about the person who reminded you that you were still alive. Tell me that I'm not alone in this story, and if my story stirred something in you, subscribe so we can keep walking through these quiet, complicated truths together. Because somewhere between loss and rediscovery, between numbness and the first shaky breath of wanting again, we're all just trying to remember one simple thing. We are still here, and that still matters.